I've always been an American, but I had a very, very unusual childhood. My family and I moved from country to country every couple of years. So at the age of 6, I was living in Pakistan, and the Pakistan-India war erupted, and it became a very tumultuous situation. We started with 12-hour curfews. We went to 24-hour curfew. The embassy issued black paper to put over the windows because we would be bombed if any kind of light came out in the middle of the evening. It just turned into a very harrowing situation. In essence, we were hostages in our homes. Well, then the embassy finally issued an evacuation, and it's one suitcase per family. Off to the airport you go, and you're not even sure where you're going. You're going to be evacuated, but you're not sure where you're going to be heading. So our family headed to Rome. We waited for a few weeks. Hopefully the situation would clear up. We'd be able to return to Pakistan. It didn't happen. So we ended up coming back to the States. And when I say I come back to the States as an American, but I had never been to the States before. So it was a very unusual kind of an adjustment for me. When I got back to the States, my parents tried to normalize us and get us back into the education mode. So they enrolled us in school, and I was the new kid in school, and the teacher gave me a competency exam to see where I'd be slotted in. And on this competency exam, as you can see, are a number of different symbols. For example, there's a cat, and I should put the C under cat. There's a mailbox, I should put the M under the mailbox. There's a motorcycle, I should put an M underneath it. But I didn't know what a cat was. I don't even know if they existed in Pakistan. Nobody that I knew had one, and we certainly didn't have one. My brother and I used to ride camels after school. And in terms of the motorcycle, to me it looked like a rickshaw. I mean, there were thousands of rickshaws all around Karachi, and so I put an R under the motorcycle. And in terms of the mailbox, well, my dad brought the mail back from work. I never saw a mailman, and we didn't have a mailbox in our gate. So it was very easy for the teacher to conclude that I was developmentally delayed. And so I was slotted into the special ed class, and then my parents had to come and clear it up. But as I spent time on this very, very diverse campus, I can't help but notice there were thousands, literally thousands of international students. And I wonder if they feel as culturally disconnected as I felt when I came to the United States. And I'm wondering, even something as simple as doing a load of laundry, when an international student may walk into a laundromat and not sure which one is, what's the washer, what's the dryer, how does this work? They look at the coin slot, what coins go in there, and what's the denomination, and where do I find them? I mean, things that we may take for granted as Americans are very, very difficult. So I think about that challenge. And then I also thought, as I looked around and I saw so many American students, I wonder how many were from small towns, perhaps in the Midwest, that had never had any exposure to different cultures, and how the adjustment was going to be for them here. Perhaps they have an international roommate, and now they're on a very, very multicultural campus. And how are they going to react to that? And I'm wondering how we could build bridges, and how we could really, really embrace cultural empathy, and to understand the challenges that people that are from different backgrounds go through on a daily basis. And then I also looked around on campus, and I saw that it seemed to me like many groups were segregated. It seemed like Chinese students tend to congregate together, and American students were together, and Indian students. And I thought to myself, what a wasted opportunity. There's a little mini UN right outside the door, and it seems to me like people are not taking advantage of that. I mean, people spend all sorts of currencies to travel around the world to experience different cultures, and it seems to me like it's right here in front of us. So when we talk about innovation, from my vantage point, what can we do to set up programs, innovative programs, out-of-the-box programs that could really allow people to interact on a regular basis? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, not only for universities, but just in a global sense. I'd like to share with you a couple experiences I have that were really pivotal points in my life that moved me down the global knowledge curve. When I went to grad school, the professor, the very first thing he said when he walked in the classroom is, how many of you are prejudiced? Well, certainly not one hand went up. I mean, who's going to self-identify as being prejudiced? And he said, well, we'll see what happens by the end of this class. Well, suddenly, all these images flashed up on the board. I mean, it was just amazing. All sorts of races, all sorts of colors, and we had to quickly write down our reactions without being politically correct or thinking it through. It was just initial reaction. And I seemed to do all right with that. I didn't have any negative thoughts that came out from all the different religions and all the different races, etc. And then we went to cultures, and it was the written part of the exercise, and it was Americans are blank, Chinese are blank, Indians are blank, boom, boom, boom. It went quickly. You had to write your thoughts. And all of a sudden it was Turks are blank, and all of a sudden I wrote hostile. And I thought to myself, well, I have to find out where this came from. And that was part of the next part of the exercise. My mother's Greek, and so my grandparents were experienced some of the hostilities that took place when Turkey invaded Greece many, many years ago. So my grandmother had really instilled that in me, and it was still in my subconscious that Turks were to be avoided, and they were kind of bad people, and I didn't want to have anything to do with them. But if I really want to be a citizen of the world, then I've got to find a way to take that away. So that was the next, I mean, now that I know where it originated from my family of origin. For other people, their prejudice may originate from the society that they were raised in, or perhaps it was because of an unfortunate experience with a member of a certain group that you all of a sudden label that entire group to be a group you don't want to interact with any longer. But then I had to figure out, how am I going to dispel this? How am I going to get rid of this anger that I have? So what I did is I started thinking about ways that I could do that. And I finally came to the conclusion that the bottom line is that in any kind of conflict, there are always people that are advocating for peace. So I wanted to find the Turks that were advocating for peace, that were not hostile, that were not aggressive. And so I decided that I needed to go to Istanbul, and I did. I ventured to Istanbul, and I thought it was one of the most magical cities that I had ever been to. And I met Turks, and I met Turks that were really, really wonderful. And all of a sudden I found that floating away. And I felt like at that point I somewhat established myself as a citizen of the world. The second most revealing or wonderful experience that I had was in Dubai. I had just written Life Could Be Sweeter, and the book started to take off, and all of a sudden I found myself on a domestic book tour, and then I was on an international book tour, and the two gentlemen that were assigned to me to take me around to different television and radio interviews were wonderful. I mean, when I met them, we instantly clicked. Within 5 minutes, they had me absolutely roaring. They were very, very funny. And that night over dinner, one of them looked at me and said, "So Bill, what do Americans think about Arabs?" And my dad always taught me that when somebody asks you an uncomfortable question, you always respond with an answer, with another question, because it buys you time. So I said, "Well, what do Arabs think about Americans?" And he said, "Well, you go first, and then I'll be honest with you." And I did. I said, well, if you were to ask many Americans about Arabs, they would say that Arabs are Muslim extremists. And he looked at his friend, and they both smiled, and he said, "That's what we think about you. We think of Americans as Christian extremists." He said, "So tell me something else about what Americans think about Arabs." I said, well, a lot of Americans would say that Arabs are disrespectful of women. And one put his hand on his head, and the other one just looked at him and his jaw dropped, and they said, "Us disrespectful of women, coming from a country where you have the highest rate of rape and domestic violence and the pornography that permeates your society, you think that we are disrespectful of women?" And it was one of the most interesting interactions I've ever had. And what I really found is, it's just like this picture shows, it's like looking through a telescope. It's like looking through a telescope that has a cultural lens on the end. And that's the way that I felt. I felt like I was looking right into their society, and then I flipped that telescope around, and they were looking right into my culture, and it went back and forth, and it was really incredible banter. And it was one of the most meaningful conversations I've ever had. And now when I meet individuals from other cultures, it's something that I try to do. I try to engage in that meaningful conversation and try to look through a cultural lens and try to get another perspective. But I think the most enlightening lesson I've ever had, and it's somewhat emotional for me, but when I lived in Pakistan, and it takes me back to where I started this presentation, we had people that worked in our home. Now, other international families would call them servants, and many international families had quote-unquote servants. These people were not servants in our home. They were our extended family. They were people that we played with, that took us out on camel rides after school. Sharif and Ali called me the little Gundi, which in Urdu means the little tiger, and I was, don't tell my brother this, but I was definitely the favorite. But I think that we had this really, really great rapport. And so when we suddenly evacuated, one of the most disturbing things was leaving our extended family behind. And when my dad came back to Pakistan several months later and went to the house, he discovered everything exactly as it was. And our extended family was standing guard because we respected each other and we liked each other, and we were all treated as equals within our household. And all the other international families that we knew that had servants had all been looted, and everyone had run off with all of their personal possessions. So I think if you leave with nothing else today, I hope you leave remembering that story and knowing how important it is to be good to each other, and how important it is to reach out to other cultures, and how important it is to really take advantage of the opportunities that you have right here in front of you. So I don't know if you want to call that last story karma, or if you want to call it paying it forward, or what goes around comes around. But the bottom line is, it's really important to be good to each other. Thank you so much.